Sorry I had to miss yesterday. Something came up. I hate missing any days, but especially like in the same week or 2 weeks in a row. Feel terrible. I had a great record until this past couple of weeks as far as attendance goes. But hey, who's counting? Um, I wanted to go back and review a story that I had talked about. Gosh, was it a month or two ago? About the potential of truckers in Australia going on strike. Of course, Australia, as you know, has their ridiculous draconian lockdowns, and the only way that their society has not completely broken down and turned into Mad Max uh, is because the truckers are still working, even if nobody else is, because they are supplying the movement of goods across the country and restocking store shelves. Of course, without that, grocery stores would quickly run empty, and so therefore people would have to go outside and forage for food. And so there was talk quite a while ago of the potential that truckers might go on strike, which is a very effective tactic. It's been used by the CIA in places like Chile in order to try and unseat Allende. There, the CIA, I believe, organized a truckers' strike, which crippled the Chilean economy and made things very difficult for Salvador Allende. You could do the same thing for, I believe his name's Scott Morrison now. I believe that's the current PM in Australia. And I have to, I'm a few days late. It was over the past week. There's been a lot going on. I haven't been able to talk. There's been lots of stories that have come up that I haven't had time to talk about, and this is one of them. But I said a while back I thought this was a nice idea, but I doubt it would happen. I thought it was, just kind of a social media rumor. But it does appear it has happened to a certain extent. I'm not sure if it's like an ongoing thing or if they did it just one day or if they're going to do it like, on and off on individual days. On a specific day, all the truckers just say, "Hey, let's go park on the interstate for the fun of it, form a convoy and stop." And well, they don't call it the interstate in Australia. I'm not sure what they call their big highways, but whatever, you know what I'm talking about. Big 8-lane highways, with a median, grass median typically. And the whole thing is just covered in truckers who have stopped and refused to make their deliveries and are just sitting there. And the point of this is to make it impossible for the lockdown to continue. If the truckers really did this forever in a sustained fashion, there would be lockdown. There would be, there could be no lockdown. The government would be forced to lift it, or they would, even if they didn't, even if they doubled down and said, no, we're not going, we don't negotiate with terrorists, without the truckers, society would break down and the government would lose all power because, if there's no food on the shelves, folks are going to get restless. They have to eat. And so I don't know if because I'm not in Australia and it's hard to get good information out of that country. Um, you know, Anytime you search for anything about Australia, posts from individual people, it's mostly trolls making fun of anyone who questions gulags and lockdowns. So it's hard for me to really gauge what the mood is like in that country. I understand that there are some people who disagree with the lockdowns, obviously, or else there wouldn't be a strike of the truckers. But they are so their voices are so drowned out by the pro-lockdown crowd that it's really hard to say what sort of effect the anti-lockdowners are having. There is no real opposition media that I know of in Australia. I mean, I know of Avi Yemeni, but again, one guy with Rebel, or with Rebel News, a watermark on his videos, and a camera guy. I mean, it's too small of a window into the country, and so I have no idea if Scott Morrison is relenting even a little bit on the draconian lockdowns because he's fearful of the truckers. It's hard to say, but I hope that or as they're called in Australia, truckies, not truckers, I hope that they continue their protests on a regular basis until normalcy is completely restored in Australia. Because even though, Morrison says, oh, well, we're going to, relent slightly once like 70 or 80% of people are vaccinated, he's certainly not talking about going back to living a normal life. He might not be, as bad as he is now. Maybe he'll only be as bad as Boris Johnson. Maybe he'll only be as bad as Bill de Blasio. Maybe he'll only be as bad as Gavin Newsom. But he certainly is not going to return Australia to being a normal country in a normal time. And I think that anyone who has at all hit their limit with this stuff should demand nothing less than for their country to return to being, a normal country in a normal time. This goes for everyone across the world. There's no reason to budge an inch on all this. Once we hit the limit and you get to the point and you say, you know what, this has gone too far, you realize that all of this nonsense was just that. It was nonsense. It was happy talk. It was, placebo. None of it really has made much of a difference. And so if that's the case, there's no point in putting ourselves through all of this pain, and we need to go back to living normal lives. I've gotten to the point recently to where, there's been enough research done on cloth masks. I have no patience for having to wear one or for seeing other people wear them. There's no excuse at this point. We've had plenty of time. Early on, when N95 masks were in short supply and we didn't know how transmissive the virus was, or if it was like, something that, could spread like, I don't know, the movie The Happening, you remember that, where it was just all in the air, and it was some germ that got into people's brains and it made them kill themselves and murder other people. That was scary. We didn't know how, what this virus was like, and we said, gee, we can't get N95s because the government is hoarding them, and because they tricked everyone into thinking that they don't do anything. And so the best we can do is try and, stitch a piece of cloth to go over our face. Maybe that'll make some difference. Well, now we have data. We know that's, well, I'm not going to say it because I know YouTube is going to get mad at me, but you can read the studies yourself on what exactly cloth masks do, what percentage of your breath it actually filters out. And you can also look for yourself and read, what size the particles of this particular virus are and how effective cloth masks are at, at stopping it. And really, that is the lowest level of restriction. So that's the least that somebody could ask of you to do. Is to do the cloth mask thing. And in blue areas of Florida, they still do that. We're not in a 100% normal state. We still have places where people, just socially, it's not the law, but socially people feel like, like schools where it is the law. As the rules set by the school districts in schools, kids have to wear these little cloth masks. And the people who support this really believe that it's making a huge difference. And you might be tempted to say, you know what, at least they're not putting us in gulags. That's not a big deal. I'm not going to throw a fit over that. You should throw a fit even over something that minor. It's important because the principle matters. That this whole year has been a mistake and a travesty. It's been more than a year, 2 years now. And so once you hit your breaking point, you're willing to challenge the authorities on any of this, you need to challenge them on all of it. Now, I also saw a decent-sized protest in Amsterdam. Favorable estimates are always going to be overblown, but, what I was seeing was people were saying 60,000. Do I buy that? No. Probably about half of that, just because I was seeing that from a source that was, in favor of the protest. People are always sort of optimistic and overestimate their own numbers. But still, 30,000 people in a city the size of Amsterdam would be huge. And also, of course, in France, the French have been putting up a great fight against this. I'm glad that the French have not totally lost their rebellious spirit, even though, the French's idea of freedom is not nearly as free as I would like it to be. They seem to be willing to hold the line on where they've drawn it in the past. The level of freedom that they've enjoyed in France, in modern times, they seem to be willing to stick their necks out in order to defend that from the state. And I have a lot of respect for people who are willing to draw a line and defend it, even if they wouldn't necessarily draw that line where I would. It was wonderful to see people, a mob of people just swarm a Westfield shopping mall in France. I don't know exactly what city, but they just came pouring in all at once, and there was nothing that the mall cops could do to stop them. And you saw the guy putting his hand out and going, hey, everybody's got to, you all got to have your vaccine passports. And there were people not only walking in without vaccine passports, they were walking around without masks even. And you know what? There were people who were part of that protest who were wearing masks. People who are saying, hey, you know what? I'll give in on the mask thing. I believe that. You've convinced me on that. But you're not going to convince me to take a shot in the arm in order to be recognized as a member of society. And, I've talked about this, in the abstract law in the past, that the state, once it gets to the point to where it oversteps its own authority, it overestimates its own power, and it imposes restrictions that are too strict on ordinary people to where they're not willing to obey them, then the state exposes its own powerlessness, because the power of the state is that people obey it. If people refuse to obey the state ceases to exist. It's entirely a social construct. And so if you have a country like France, who is willing to purposefully antagonize its citizens to the point to where you would see mobs of people rushing in to a shopping mall specifically so that they may break the law. That's their whole point. All these people just didn't want to go to the mall on Saturday. It was they wanted to go there to prove a point, to say, you can't stop me from going in there. I wish we would see more active defiance like this in the United States, but, hey, I think that the places in which maybe you would see more defiance of this, these kinds of rules are not being imposed anyway, although I shouldn't say that. The culture of New York City, New Yorkers, if you ever meet them, very defiant people. You would think that culturally they would not put up with this, yet they are. I think of, New Yorkers as being more tenacious and disobedient than your average Frenchman. And so I will say that I am disappointed in New York. San Francisco, it's a bunch of gay guys. They do what the cops tell them. I'm not surprised by that. They're upper middle class white guys at the end of the day, whether they're gay or not. L.A., I would imagine that there are a lot of neighborhoods in L.A. where the city is not able to enforce their rules. I think that depending on whether you've got, more LAPD cops or MS-13 gangsters on your block, you may or may not have to obey the rules in LA. So, all in all, I hope that the news of all of these protests that go on around the world, every single one of them, is trumpeted and is broadcast far and wide, though I know it will not be, because I want more people to be inspired by this and to realize that things do not have to be this way, and that the fight is very far from being over. It is not lost on me how lucky I am to have been born where I am, just by pure chance, that I have not had to bear the brunt of this last couple of years. That I have been, in the most fortunate of circumstances to where I've had more freedom than, anyone else, people in any other place on the planet. But even here, there is a role, even if it's only culturally, and culturally it's, is most important, because if the culture is against this, the state can never impose it. It's the true message of, of anyone who, who stands up against the state. You're trying to show that the culture, that the society which the state governs is not in lockstep with them. And to the extent that that is true, their edicts are unenforceable. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.